Hello there, Legal Voice Cocktails for a Cause attendees. Oh, good. Someone can hear me. Hi. Okay. Thank you for responding in the chat. So I know I'm not just talking to myself here in my basement. It's wonderful to see you all. I hope everyone's doing well. Welcome to Legal Voice's first ever Cocktails for a Cause event. Also, welcome to hopefully Legal Voice's last ever virtual Cocktails for a Cause event. We are very excited to have you here. My name is Vicky Slade, and I am the president of the board of directors for Legal Voice. It has been my honor to be serving in this role during this time of transformation for our country and for our organization. And I'm so delighted and excited that so many of you are here with us tonight in your own homes and celebrating with us. So thank you all for showing up in the various ways that you support this organization. We have a great brief program for you tonight. We're going to be highlighting the work of Black, trans, and non-binary activists in the Northwest, and we're going to talk a little bit about how their fight for liberation is essential for the liberation of all of us. Before we move on, it's important to acknowledge for a moment that we acknowledge the land that we inhabit, and we name the harm and violence that took place in order for us to exist here, and the harm and violence that continues to take place. Prior to the program starting, you may have seen in the chat, we asked folks to share the indigenous land that they are on. And Legal Voice would like to share that its office is on Suquamish, Muckleshoot, Duwamish, Stillaguamish, and Coast Salish lands, known as Seattle. If you haven't had a chance to share or you are unsure of the lands that you inhabit, please check out the link shared in the chat. And thanks for those of you who are doing it. Before we get started, we'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors that have made a lot of our work and made this event possible. Stoll Reeves, please save your applause till the end. Actually, that's not true. You can clap as much as you like inside your own homes. Our sponsors are Stoll Reeves, Perkins Coie, McDonald Hogan Bayless, Polzanelli, and Davis Wright Tremaine. Sponsors, if you're here, please say hello in the chat. And if you are sitting there and feeling very left out and upset because you are not a sponsor, don't worry about it. There's still plenty of opportunity to sponsor Legal Voice, and we do have our auction coming up later this year, and we would love to bring on some more sponsors. So there's no reason to feel left out. So 2020, as you may have heard, was a challenging year for many, many reasons. One particularly low point that you may not be as aware of is that last year we saw an unprecedented level of violence committed against trans and non-binary people. In fact, 2020 was the most violent year against trans people on record. There were at least 44 homicides committed against trans and non-binary people in the United States in 2020, and most of the victims been disproportionately Black, trans women, or femmes. These incidents of violence are often underreported or misreported, so the true number of victims is unfortunately likely higher. 2021 has not fared much better. So far, we've seen at least 12 homicides of trans, non-binary, and non-gender conforming people. That's a 266% increase in this type of violence, these type of homicides, compared to the same point last year. We're only a quarter of the way into 2021, and so if we don't act now, we're going to lose more trans and non-binary people to violence than any previous year. This is a crisis, and it's critical that we take action. And like so many issues, it takes all of us contributing in the different ways that we can in order to combat this important issue. Many of you will likely know that Legal Voice is committed to a community lawyering approach. You probably also know, but just in case you don't, that means centering the communities that are most impacted and following the lead of those community organizations in the work that we do. We therefore wanted to highlight two of our community partners in this work, the Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network and Utopia. The Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network has a mutual aid program, and they also brought buses in to convert into temporary housing for their community members in need. And Utopia, which is the United Territories of Pacific Islanders Alliance, which is a queer and trans-led organization, has arranged a vaccine clinic, and it has also provided a lot of support, much needed support for the Asian and Pacific Islander, trans, non-binary, non-gender conforming community. So please check out these organizations, and they're doing great work. And I see Lavender Rights Project, yes, that's my next note. We're also going to be hearing tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from more of our community partners, including the executive director of the Lavender Rights Project and the founding member of the Washington Black Trans Task Force, Jaelynn Scott, is going to be here speaking tonight. The Lavender Rights Project advances a more just and equitable society by providing low-cost civil legal services and community programming centered in the values of social justice for trans, non-binary, two-spirit, queer, and Black communities. Through direct legal representation, advocacy, and community programming, their by-and-force services aim to radically reimagine the landscape for trans, non-binary, two-spirit, queer, and Black people while building community resilience, encouraging self-advocacy, and asserting the rights of marginalized populations. Jaelynn has worked as the director of HR. She's worked at operations and education for nonprofits and religious organizations. She is an ordained minister, and she regularly preaches and facilitates workshops on justice and mindfulness. Jaelynn is passionate about trans liberation, sacred practices for self-care, decolonized labor practices, and mindfulness in the workplace. So it's a real treat to get to hear from her. We're also going to be having Mattie Mooney joining us. Mattie is one of the founders of the Trans Women of Color Solidarity Group. They can typically be found laughing at inside jokes with their little human, a 9-year-old Zaya Riley, and planning their next getaway / world takeover with their partner Nenta. But taking a break from that to talk to us tonight, so we're very glad. And finally, I'm pleased to introduce to you Catherine West. Catherine is a staff attorney with Legal Voice. She fights for gender equity with administrative, legislative, and litigation strategies. Catherine also seeks to amplify and advance community-led strategies by working in coalition with organizations and individuals, and she is the best. Catherine and her partner Stella have 2 cats and a large fluffy rescue dog. They enjoy working in the yard and watching Parks and Rec and Brooklyn 99. I don't know if it's 99 or 99, haven't seen it. But during the pandemic, they've also enjoyed spending time apart in their separate rooms. So thank you, and with that, I'll leave it for our next presenter. 99, sorry, thank you.
I was on mute. I'm so sad Vicky doesn't know about Brooklyn Nine-Nine. You need to watch that show. It's like the world we all want to live in. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Catherine West. I use she, her pronouns. It is a joy to be in community with you, even in this virtual space. I want to first take a moment to remember the lives of the massage workers and clients who were murdered in Atlanta last week in an act of gendered colonial violence and white supremacy. Legal Voice is proud to partner with community organizations dedicated to advancing the safety and economic security of people in the sex trade. And the leader of one of those groups, Emi Koyama, spoke at a vigil this week in Seattle. And I share this sentiment, which she shared at the vigil, because it just so perfectly sums things up. Not all migrant Asian women working at massage parlors engage in sex work. So massage workers should not be equated with sex workers. But the way society vilifies, criminalizes, and targets sex workers for violence, as well as targeting women, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, immigrants, and poor people, affects all Asian massage workers. Legal Voice grieves the loss of these precious lives and recognizes how vulnerable, invisible, and unloved people at the intersections of those identities may feel. We're in solidarity with the demands of the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities to be seen, to be counted, to be cared for, as well as the demand to decriminalize sex work. I'm going to talk a bit tonight about my work, my joyful community lawyering work on the path toward trans liberation. And then, as Vicky said, we're going to hand it over, we're going to pass the mic to 2 tremendously visionary leaders in the trans community. And I'm so excited for you to hear from them, because they're going to be so good, you're going to forget everything that I said, which is a-okay with me. But I want to just acknowledge that having us come together like this, even in a virtual space, is kind of a revolutionary act, because when we share space and we co-conspire to create the world that we all want to live in, to vision out what that can and should be, we're changing the trajectory of the world. And many forces operate to keep us isolated, underfunded, fighting for scarce resources, but coming together like this, exploring our commonalities, our shared interests, to learn from each other, to show solidarity, and to be curious about and give each other the benefit of the doubt helps create the world that we want to live in. Many people who know me know that I'm a huge fan of Adrienne Marie Brown's work. In her book, Emergent Strategy, she says, and I quote, "When we are engaged in acts of love, we humans are at our best and most resilient." And included in those acts of love are the love of community that makes us work tirelessly with broken hearts. That quote to me completely embodies community lawyering, which Vicky did talk a bit about. Community lawyering is a really joyful way to practice law. It focuses legal advocacy on community identified solutions and works to enhance and develop community leadership that will then use its power to effect systemic change. So it's really like planting a bunch of seeds and then watching them all flourish and grow together. I'm going to talk to you just about a few things that I'm working on with the community lawyering approach. The first of which is a big systemic litigation case. And I want to acknowledge the plaintiff, Lindsay Hecox, who's here today from Idaho. So as you likely know, last year, Idaho passed the first of its kind trans athlete ban, which banned trans and intersex girls from competing consistent with their gender identity and included really gross ways to prove your gender, including potentially a blood test, a chromosome test, a genital exam. I mean, really things that we want our young girls and female athletes to have to endure just to play sports. While that bill was being debated in the legislature, my colleague Chelsea Ganua-Lincoln was on the ground organizing people to testify, to go to the Capitol, to stand up against the law, and as well as create a space, a container that could hold this community together. Because as we all know, when we listen to people talk about trans folks in ugly, ignorant ways, it can be very harmful. And so Chelsea did an excellent job of trying to create a loving atmosphere for people who were standing up against this law. Unfortunately, the legislature passed it anyway, the governor signed it, and that's when Lindsay, at the time a freshman in college, decided to, she would serve as a plaintiff in the case to challenge the law. She's just the bravest person I know. She's just so gracious and has been such an eloquent speaker for herself, her cause, as well as for trans people generally. And we're fortunate that over the summer, the judge in the case agreed with us and issued an injunction preventing the implementation of the law, which then Idaho appealed. So that case is now at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we are scheduled for oral argument on May 3rd. So please keep Lindsay and everyone in your thoughts on May 3rd. And of course, we've been watching in horror and disbelief as so many other states have followed Idaho's lead by enacting trans bans in sports. And obviously, it is not because there are any issues with trans inclusion in sports. It is just a way for a certain conservative viewpoint to gain steam and garner their worldview and etc. So again, super proud to have Lindsay here with us, super proud of her work on behalf of herself and the community. The next thing I want to talk to you about is work that I'm doing with some advocates in King County in Seattle to reform the jail policies around housing, healthcare, treatment of trans and non-binary people that go into the jail. We were proud to get connected up with a woman, Joan Fox, who was protesting at the Black Lives Matter movement and was arrested. She was held in a men's segregation unit because she is trans, and under the jail's policies, they require that trans women be held with men. She was repeatedly, other men were exposing their genitals to her during that time. It was an incredibly harmful situation. And Joan, after getting out of jail, banded together with the community to say these policies need to change. And so we joined with her and have been advocating for changes at the jail, which they have agreed to make good changes, but there's still more work to be done. And we're very proud to be working on that with Lavender Rights, Disability Rights Washington, QLaw, public defenders, and other partners, as well as impacted community members who've been harmed by those very harmful policies. We're also working to advance trans access to gender-affirming healthcare and non-binary healthcare. That has come in two forms. One is a multi-year campaign advocating with the state Medicaid agency, the healthcare authority, to change their rules around access to care. Unfortunately, for many years, that healthcare agency has limited or completely excluded access to certain kinds of medical care. And again, we've been working in coalition with Ingersoll Gender Center, Northwest Justice Project, Northwest Health Law Advocates, lots of organizations and impacted community members around that. And it has been a very slow battle, but the Healthcare Authority has finally agreed to, instead of treating healthcare requests of the trans and non-binary community differently than they do any other healthcare, they've agreed to finally review those healthcare requests just like any other healthcare request that they receive, which seems like a no-brainer and that they should have done a long time ago, but they're finally willing to do that now. So we're very happy about that. And then finally, the sort of pièce de résistance is a bill that many of us have been working on this legislative session, SB 5313, which was just approved last night. And so we're all very happy. This grew out of really organizing people just talking to each other and knowing that despite the legislature's work and despite the Office of Insurance Commissioner's strongly worded letters, that people were still not getting access to the care that they need. And that's because insurance providers were wrongly denying it as cosmetic care. So they were using sort of a cisgender lens to evaluate whether a care request would be approved. And so lots of care requests were being denied. And then even when community members would go to the insurance commissioner to complain or ask for help, the insurance commissioner would say, you know, it's okay for an insurer to deny care if it's cosmetic. And so it was just this complete mismatch and misunderstanding. So lots of people came together. Again, Mattie Mooney, Dana Savage, both of whom are here tonight, Ari Robbins, QLaw, just worked tirelessly to write a bill, to lobby the bill, to talk to legislators, to organize panels of people who would be willing to share their experiences about care being denied and how detrimental it was for them. And it really has just been a beautiful community effort where we wanted to make sure the community knew what we were trying to do. We wanted to make sure that what we were trying to do was responsive to the community need. And we're just so thrilled that it came to fruition and the legislature passed the law last night. So there are some technical details. The bill has to be sent back to the Senate for reconciliation and then go to the governor. But we feel very confident and hopeful that those things are going to happen. So again, just thrilled by the community engagement that occurred on this bill, as well as the other things that we've been working on. And really just, again, cannot say enough that we couldn't do this work, we couldn't do community lawyering without the community organizations and individuals being willing to work with us and spend time. And so, which is why we're passing the microphone here tonight to share space with Mattie, Mooney, and Jaelynn Scott. So I am now going to hand it off to Jaelynn. Vicky did introduce Jaelynn incredibly well. I also want to add that in addition to being the ED of Lavender Rights, that she is the first Black trans femme executive director in Washington State. So we are so thrilled and honored to have you with us. Jaelynn, take it away.
Thank you. And just so you know, I am in Hilltop in Tacoma, so at any point we may be entertained with a Young Jeezy concert or a motorcycle gang, which is happening right now. So it's good to be with you. As Executive Director of Lavender Rights Project and founding member of the Washington Black Trans Task Force, I want to chat with you a bit about how our organization is growing into the call to eradicate anti-Blackness and to center Black trans life specifically. I'd like to begin by reading what inspired us from the Transgender Law Center. A group of BIPOC trans persons came up with a trans agenda for liberation, really a manifesto. And one of those pieces is leadership. And I want to read this. Black trans women must be trusted to lead. Black trans feminine people hold the expertise and solutions to end violence in our communities. We hold the knowledge to create a world where Black trans feminine people have the freedom to thrive. We envision a world where Black trans folks have equitable access to healthcare, housing, bodily autonomy, and intergenerational connection. You heard earlier, and you probably know, the fact is the identities of Black trans women are at a dangerous intersection of historical oppression in America. Dangerous intersections such as ableism, anti-Blackness, transphobia, misogyny, and sexual violence. As a country, we have not agreed that harming Black trans women and Black trans non-binary femmes is a problem. In fact, given the anti-trans bills we're looking at, we are not even close to agreeing that trans people have a right to exist. I feel like there's a storm, a backlash, maybe as a result of Black Lives Matter, maybe as a result of the summer or the new administration, but I am afraid of the targeting of our most vulnerable Black trans persons and trans youth of color. The murder rates are already through the roof, especially for the percentage per population of us. And I'm deeply afraid that they will continue to get worse and worse. I started with oppression, and I don't know how else to get the point across, but I do want to name that this oppression, this terror that's inflicted on our community, this genocide is not who we are. Black trans people are the conjurers of social change. We're the creators of art. We're the keepers of community. I use that word conjurer to conjure. I'm a minister, so I'm gonna go into some religious stuff, but I'm not gonna preach at you. I'm gonna try not to. I probably will. To conjure is to create outside of the constructs of settler colonialism, outside of the constructs of white supremacy and capitalism. Black trans leadership is inherently wise, it's reasonable, and it's transformative, and I can't think of another time that it's more needed. Yet, in spite of our history of excellence and leadership, we're not trusted to lead, we're kicked out of organizations, and we're often just an afterthought in terms of client care and service delivery. We were thinking about this problem with Lavender Rights Project, and here's what I believe. I believe when we take care of the most marginalized in our society, those with the most intersectional needs, we take care of the entire community. This idea, this principle, this focusing of efforts is what we all call centering. You know this. Centering is an organizing strategy. It is an organizing strategy, a skillful means of working in the spirit of accompaniment with the community. Centering requires not only that we change how we're thinking about things, but the focus of our work, and also a change in our leadership. Centering as an organizing principle is the habitual return to an initial ethic and a shaping of our work and our institutions around this ethic. For example, the ethic of the value of Black trans life. And it's not limited to individuals or organizations, it's entire systems. Audre Lorde informed us that, we can't use that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. When we choose to center, we're gonna have to have a radical systemic institutional change, and it starts, honestly, it can start on an organizational level at your place of work. I believe we can return to the principle of centering and be assured that the work we are doing is not a distraction from our other day-to-day work. It really shapes and it clarifies our purpose and brings meaning to everything else that we do. To center doesn't exclude others. We can think very large, be wide as the sky in terms of who we serve, but center as fine as a needlepoint. For example, anti-Blackness, we know is the fulcrum. It's power in white supremacy, one of the original sins of this country. We know if we dismantle it, the effects are felt across the board, and including in the Asian American community, who are mourning right now and feeling the pain of unchecked toxic masculinity, whiteness, cisgender, and heteronormativity. This is, I so believe in this principle, and I think it only works if we get specific, deep, and commit to our centering principles. Specificity brings strength to social action. When we work from the principle of centering, we must deconstruct and tell the story of how white supremacy has worked to entangle us all in oppression, really. We must tell the story of who we really are, who those are that we serve, who we once were, and who we are being forced to be. We must talk about the intersection of racism, classism, misogyny, noir, and transphobia. And centering, along with accompaniment, is learning these stories in community, identifying how anti-Blackness supports the status quo and shows up in our work. We need to start producing and reproducing new ways of working in the world. I know that many of you have the same thoughts as we did, and I understand that for those of you who practice law, it has its own justice intervention and methodology, but also its own institutional racism and impenetrable norms. I'm not an attorney, but what I've learned from attorneys is there's an absolute lack of hope at all that the law will bring justice, true justice to communities of color. And I know there's a desire to do law plus, do something different that can actually work on true justice. If you will, very humbly, we're starting out, we're new. Our organization is 6 years old, going on 6. And we're new in this initiative, but I want to tell the story of what we're doing, and maybe that can inspire something in you. This year, Lavender Rights Project leaned into reimagining the legal landscape for us and building community resilience for Black, trans, and trans non-binary people. We're not now, and really we never were, just a legal services organization, but we're a queer service and trans service organization that has a legal department. Naming that was really powerful for us. And we know that we had this problem of Black trans death and murder, and it was the thing that was most on our minds and our concerns and our hearts. And it seemed the only thing we could do is a Facebook post. Our legal service work, although we have decided to focus on Black trans life, continues, and it provides a foundation for our social justice work. But our priorities have shifted from, identifying ourselves just as a queer and trans law firm. There's a lot of pride in that. But to a community of concern for community resilience and intersectional justice. Sorry, I'm losing battery power. This shifting of our priorities informs how we handle cases and informs how we organize. Some innovations we have made is the prioritization of Black trans leadership. It seems odd that you think about me as executive director of a legal nonprofit. It seems odd that I would be leading a legal services organization. It's a model we learned from the Transgender Law Center, who have also found it successful. This particular perspective of having a Black trans person from community who's not legal, leading legal services, provides a depth of diverse experience and empowers non-legal staff to prioritize their work too. Programming work for us now is not mutually exclusive of the legal work we do for the wider community. It's an enhancement of that legal work. We founded, and I founded, the Washington Black Trans Task Force. The task force is composed of six Black trans women and femmes from the Seattle Tacoma community. This is not a project, a program, or some separate entity from the organization. It's an investment by our organization in Black trans leadership. They are the guiding force, the steering committee of our organization. The task force guides the entire org on the path of building resilience and protection from violence for trans person and Black trans women and femmes. In this process, we've shifted from mostly a white, queer and trans organization, both in who we serve and who our staff were, to a Black-led organization with a majority Black staff within a year. And I know identity matters, but mere inclusion by numbers will not result in effective change. In order to counteract our history and become a truly Black-led org, we have to continually invest in Black leadership. We may fail at times, but we are committed to the difficult path. Disrupting violence at the intersection of identity is our new mission. Our focus on Black trans femmes is simply because this is where intersectional violence is the most obvious. Our work with the wider community in family law, identity documents, civil rights, employment protections, know your rights workshops, all the things that a lot of you all do if you're doing community law, are all informed by this and extends this disruption of violence to all of our clients regardless of their identity. We have found that we practice law better when we center the elimination of anti-Blackness and trans misogynoir in all of our work. We fulfill our mission better when we zero in on the needs of Black trans women. I say it all the time, when we get it right for Black trans women and femmes, we get it right for the entire queer and trans community. I think what I'm asking in closing is for you to reimagine your workspace and your work. Not that you change who your clientele is, but to change your framework and focus on centering. And specifically, I ask whether you do programmatic work or legal work to think what you can do to disrupt violence against Black trans women and femmes, right where you are. Thank you. And thanks for bearing with me as the fan and the power is going out. I want to introduce Mattie, who you've heard from a little earlier. I know Mattie really well, work closely. I consider Mattie a deep friend. Mattie Mooney is an inspiration to our community. Really, a lot of us don't make it to a certain age, and so we have to we have to have some of our younger folk in eldership. So Mattie Mooney is an elder for me. Absolutely doesn't fit in terms of age. Yeah. They are invested in ensuring access to gender affirming care by supporting community, navigating insurance enrollment and denials, and working with providers to address ways to improve and expand access to gender affirming healthcare for the trans and gender nonconforming community. They are extremely passionate about transgender and gender nonconforming healthcare because they believe that marginalization by the healthcare community leads to poor health outcomes and increased health disparities for the trans and gender diverse community. They also believe that many solutions to the issues within our community lie with trans folks. It's important to rely on our own voices to share and support our own needs. It's also important to rely on trans and gender diverse experiences to inform policy, healthcare, social services, education, and economic needs. If we aren't at the table, it's imperative that we make our own, they say. Please join me in welcoming Mattie.
Thank you so much, Jaelynn. I really appreciate it. Hello and good evening. My name is Mattie, and I'm one of the co-founders of Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network. We were born of 5 trans friends, myself, Lourdes Velasco, Isis Vina, Kelson Caldwell, and the late Constance Blakely. And we spent our non-work hours, often into the wee hours of the morning, finding and securing housing, money, and other basic necessities for the BIPOC trans community, specifically trans women of color in Seattle and the West Coast. Since starting in September of 2018, we have been able to utilize a mostly mutual aid model to support the financial liberation of trans women of color. We started with $1,200 and have since been able to give over $300,000 to our community, in addition to air purifiers during fire season, PPE kits, hot food delivery, because I love to cook, and when I cook in excess, and we deliver that to community. Safer sex supplies for sex workers, and the sponsor a sink project, community emergency housing, fresh fruits and vegetables via our partnership with trans owned and operated Pink Moon Farm. And we also, along with BTTF and some other really great BIPOC trans and queer organizations, through the first ever Black and Brown Trans Pride event last year, Taking Black Pride. I could go on forever about the material accomplishments of Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network, but most importantly, I want to highlight some of the underrated non-material accomplishments and tips for engaging in generative community work that have helped me become a better steward of community. And hopefully you'll take something away from it that will help you along the way as well. Number 1, unpacking oppression is a 24/7 job, no vacation. As a Black trans disabled person, I am constantly challenging the harmful conditioning that we all receive about how we just don't matter, or we don't measure up, or we don't deserve opportunities, or hell, don't even deserve respect unless we are white, cis, het men. As such, constantly being aware and being mindful regarding recognizing anti-Blackness or transphobia or ableism, just to name a few, manifest and working to continuously disrupt patterns of oppression when you see them is key. But you may not always get it right the first time. And that leads me to my next tip. 2, when you are challenged about something that you said or did, or that may have hurt or harmed someone or contributed to their oppression, apologize and mean it with action. We've all heard that actions speak louder than words, but it can be so much harder when you are confronted with the fact that something you may have done has hurt and impacted someone negatively. We often see ourselves as beacons of good intention, but as I always say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And as some of you know, I had the honor of working on the Gender Affirming Treatment Act with some amazing attorneys, including Dana Savage, Catherine West, and Ari Robbins. But when I released the first graphic, I was surprised to find out from my community that it contained a phrase that was ableist. In this moment, I paused. I don't care what anyone tells you. Everyone's first inclination when being told that they did something wrong or made a mistake or hurt someone is always defensiveness. However, in that pause, I was able to think about the impact of the statement that I used. I was able to repeat to myself the reasoning that statement was ableist. And I was able to identify, wow, this is actually a really great learning opportunity, because the fact that I had no idea that this statement was ableist goes to show how normalized ableism is, even as a disabled person myself. I thank Jaelynn and Randy for sharing with me my mistake and let them know that I would absolutely be more aware of my word choice in the future. The interaction made me feel good in that, though I had messed up, I had these two people who cared enough about my growth and me as a person to say, hey, you made a mistake. And I was in a place to step back from that knee-jerk response of defensiveness in order to receive that information. Number 3, the fight for social justice for our communities requires integrity. Many of you are attorneys. Others are in positions where a level of integrity is required in order to do what you do. However, integrity in the context of social justice and organizing work allows other people to trust you because they know that you have a set of values and commitments and seek to live by them. They aren't just empty words. They are constantly being challenged by life, by social situations and employment situations, and then put into action when you have everything to lose. Integrity helps us listen to our conscience and do the right thing, to tell the truth. It was Martin Luther King who once said, "It may well be that we have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time." Seattle is a great place for pretty words that don't mean a thing. As a form of social currency and power building, particularly for white folks and white-led orgs and institutions. Seattle is full of social justice warriors who don't fight, so to speak. But where's the integrity in that? So I say to you, speak up when you see something that goes against your values as stewards of our community. Encourage and believe those who speak up so that you don't inadvertently perpetuate systems that are invested in silencing those with the most to say and zero space to say it. Speak up so that others may find the courage to speak up too. Number 4, it is okay to not know what to say. In organizing and community work, folks often feel like they need to be on 24/7 and know everything about everything. However, there is so much power in saying nothing. It puts you in a better position to truly listen and absorb the message. Number 5, if you aren't uncomfortable, you aren't doing it right. Sitting with discomfort has been called a social justice imperative. Many of us are just not used to being uncomfortable, especially in deconstructing our own relationship to privilege or being confronted with mistakes. Amelia Meeman, former assistant director of the Women's Center at UMBC, explains that discomfort is a signal that I think we can pay more attention to because it designates a path for learning, catharsis, and/or growth. Given that discomfort is and can be a great teacher. Discomfort is integral to social justice work. There are certain pieces of social justice work that require sitting with discomfort and having the patience to slow down and not leap for the nearest possible resolution. Here are some social justice practices and tenets that are, among many other things, predicated on uncomfortable situations, i.e. discomfort. So take note. Restorative justice. The focus of restorative practices, also restorative justice, is on repairing harm in a community-centered way. The process of doing so is, as you might imagine, riddled with discomfort, materializing through very awkward and vulnerable conversations. Fundamentally, those deep and often hard conversations allow us to reach for the context in the story that can help us come to empathy, generosity, and create dynamic resolutions. Cultural humility. Cultural humility is a paradigm that offers an alternative to its more popular but less realistic cousin, cultural competency. Cultural competency means to an end founded on this idea that if we just put our minds to it and go through enough trainings, then maybe we'll understand what it is to experience racism or xenophobia or transphobia or heterosexism or anti-Semitism or sexism, etc. Cultural humility, however, is predicated on process and the idea that people who are different from one another should ask more questions and be willing to admit their lack of knowledge or experience. Acknowledging and learning from privilege. Critical to any social justice praxis, or literally just being a decent human being, is our understanding of our own privilege. Whether you are new to this and just understanding the pervasive nature of transphobia, homophobia, sexism, anti-Blackness, or you've been in the active anti-racist work section for years, this is a never-ending journey. In order to be allies in this work to people who may inhabit different intersectional identities, we have to sit with the harm our privilege deals towards others. It is never comfortable. It should never be particularly cozy. We should always be asking those questions of, how much space am I taking up? Am I entitled to this? How will this action impact others around me? Often the answers aren't clear or flattering, but self-reflection and insight are critical to being a responsible and respectful ally and steward to our communities. Last but not least, relationship building and critical generosity. Relationship building across difference is mutually incompatible with oppression. Think about that. Relationship building across difference is mutually incompatible to oppression. How do you think you grow closer to a person? Conflict that you survive. And I don't condone ignoring your gut about the toxic people who definitely need to be yeeted out and out of your life. But what I am trying to get at is that I hope that we can stick with the folks who make mistakes, but who demonstrate through their actions, commitment to growth, and genuine intention that they are willing to stick with us, even when we respond with anger, sadness, or disappointment. Critical generosity is that step where we take a beat and open ourselves up to the realization that not everyone is as infallible as we want them to be. We withhold judgment about a person's character, and we continue to search for the humanity and the story that they've lived that has gotten them to the conclusion that they've gotten to. Truth be told, some people may be way beyond our time and energy in this, and in this work, there will be many. But there are also many others who just need that room to fail or make an error and to be taken in with grace nonetheless. And finally, discomfort is natural. Nothing is black and white. We exist in the gray matter of the world. And when we find conflict or tension or challenges, the reality is that there is no perfect answer in how to resolve that. There are complexities to each solution that we try to make. We're all trying really hard to get through and make those solutions work, but we don't often get to anything resembling perfect. That is why the discomfort discomfort is so important to listen to. Thank you. And next, we have Dana Savage, one of my personal favorites. Thanks, friends.
I said, y'all hear that? I'm one of Mattie's personal favorites. Remember that. Thank you, Mattie, for that wonderful speech. Jaelynn and Catherine and Vicky for all of your contributions tonight. It's been a truly inspirational evening. My name is Dana Savage. I'm the Vice President of Issues and Advocacy for the QLaw Bar Association of Washington, where I work on behalf of Washington's LGBTQ+ community to advance the equity and legal protections for marginalized communities via organizing, legal intervention, and legislative advocacy. I had the distinct honor of being a vocal driver and advisor to lawmakers for the passage of the Gay and Trans Panic Defense Ban under the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act of 2020. Recently, I also had the privilege of working with Catherine West, Mattie Mooney, Ari Robbins, and many others as a co-drafter on the Gender Affirming Treatment Act, which has passed both chambers as of last night and is now awaiting Senate reconciliation and then the governor's signature. Finally, outside of my legislative advocacy work, I work on behalf of QLaw, outside of my legislative advocacy work on behalf of QLaw, in my day job, I am an Assistant Attorney General with the Washington State Attorney General's Office, where I represent the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in dependency proceedings. But that's enough about me. That's not why any of us are here. As you're likely aware, legislative bodies across the country have been introducing an onslaught of anti-trans bills attacking trans athletes to compete in sports, attacking medical providers for providing gender-affirming life-saving care for trans youth. And none of this is new or unexpected. It's been going on for years and years, but now there's a new resurgence. We saw this happening in Idaho last year with their barrage of anti-trans legislation, one of which is still being litigated, where the courageous Lindsay Hecox, who's here tonight, took on the state of Idaho. And we want to say thank you for all the work you're doing in that regard, because frankly speaking, our on-the-ground plaintiffs are absolutely critical to all the work we do on the legal side. We literally cannot do anything without you there. So as a lawyer, thank you. And this is also why we do work in difficult states like Idaho, and it's crucial. Other states are not so quick to adopt the protections that that you've heard about tonight, that I briefly touched on when I was hopping on here today. Places like Arkansas, Alabama, South Dakota, they have similar bills. They try to force queer folks to think twice before asserting their rights. And while our country's showing up and supporting bills and efforts to combat these, I guess, campaigns, you could call them, the fight's not over. It's not going to end anytime soon. We're still going to be facing these kinds of issues for years to come. On a personal note, I've worked with Legal Voice, specifically Catherine West and Ashley Sutton, to secure the passage of the Gender Affirming Treatment Act. And I do want to emphasize, without these organizations, without Legal Voice specifically, and Catherine West and Ashley, our legislative efforts would have gone nowhere. They were truly instrumental in the passage of that act. Similarly, the last couple of years with David Ward and the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act, back when David Ward worked with Legal Voice, that wouldn't have happened without their support. And that's because Legal Voice is about demanding change and getting results for communities. They have the institutional knowledge and connections to demand and secure the changes we need to make our world a better place for the people we live in, or for everyone to live in. As you heard from Jaelynn, another important organization that does similar work but on the ground is the Lavender Rights Project. They're providing low cost and free civil and legal services for our queer and gender diverse siblings. They're providing help to incarcerated persons on their name changes and just their general rights to exist and have some semblance of dignity while being subjected to the system. The Lavender Rights Project is working with the Black Trans Force to provide all kinds of support, literally from the ground up. They're giving the direct, on-the-ground legal representation, advocacy, and community programming that we need to truly have a foundation in our community. They're hitting the issues down to the needle point, to steal a quote from Jaelynn. They're fighting for the very folks that build and support our causes. Lavender Rights Project is reimagining the landscape for trans, non-binary, two-spirit, queer, and Black people in a way that builds resilience, self-advocacy, and the advancement of our rights. We need to donate to Legal Voice to allow us to continue the fight across the Northwest. We need to donate to Lavender Rights Project to support the amazing work that's being led directly by our community here in Washington State. The links have been put in the chat over and over. They're still there. I'm going to do my part. Y'all know what to do. And I just want to take a few moments to thank you all for your time and your support, as always. And I believe now we have Vicky coming up, though I don't know if there's any kind of donation stuff between.
Hi, thanks, Dana. And I'll pause because I don't want anyone to feel rushed whilst making their donations to Legal Voice and Lavender Rights Project. So please take your time. But I just want to say what an inspiring evening and an amazing group of speakers. I am so appreciative to Jaelynn, Mattie, and Dana for your words tonight. It's obviously been a really challenging and difficult time, but it's so inspiring to hear from people who are doing this great work. And it gives me a lot of hope, and I hope that the rest of you are feeling that way too. So don't forget to make your donations. The links are available in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and spending some time with us tonight and continuing to be members of our community. There's a lot more work to be done. We're really excited to partner with you in it. Please feel free to, well, our program is concluding, our official program, but please feel free to stay and chat with your friends in Remo, and the virtual event will stay open for about another half an hour. So thank you so much, everybody. It's great to be together for this brief period, and have a great night.